Welcome to Origins, the podcast that dives deep into the business of venture capital, where we learn how the people behind the capital, both GPs and LPs, make decisions. I'm Nick Chirls, GP at Asylum Ventures, a newly launched early-stage venture firm in New York City, investing in founders that feel like artists.
And I'm Beezer Clarkson, your LP co-host from Sapphire Partners, where we aim to invest in exceptional early-stage venture capital managers, both emerging and established franchise VCs. And Nick, we have a very exciting milestone today at Origins.
I didn't realize that until you guys gave me the heads up. This is our 100th episode, which is insane. I guess we've been doing this for 8 years, something like that.
Well, you've been. I mean, props where the props are due. You've done the lion's share of all this work. So major congratulations.
Thank you. We've been, it's been really fun. I've learned a ton myself. Yeah, thanks to everybody that has listened, and hopefully you've learned a thing or two like me along the way.
Well, I'm really excited. Like I said, huge congratulations to you. I remember when we did the first recording ever of Origins.
That's right. You were number one.
I was number one.
Guest. Yeah,
and then we had to delete it because it was so bad.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, you're right. We re-recorded.
Mostly because every alarm in New York City seemed to be going off and every fire truck, which was pretty funny. But it's been an honor.
That was very DIY, very legit. We've come a long way, Beezer.
We have. If I think about that episode and then who we have today, who is such an amazing guest. And I want you to introduce him because I know he's a personal as well as professional friend. And I've been doing a little catch up behind the scenes, watching him on other YouTube spots he's done. And he's super badass. I'm very excited. Please introduce our guest for our 100th episode.
So our guest is Zach Weinberg. I've known him since high school. We both went to Hunter College High School in New York City, which for me was a decidedly life-changing experience. It was one of the public magnet schools here in New York. Zach is a insanely amazing, prolific entrepreneur. He and his partner, Nat, they met at Wharton. I think they dropped out to start Invite Media, which they sold to Google in 2010. And after Invite, they ventured out of ad tech and into healthcare and bio, where Zach has been since. In 2012, he and Nat again founded Flatiron Health. It was a software company that pulls patient data for cancer treatment centers. And they sold Flatiron to Roche for more than $2 billion. So Curie.Bio is a biotech investment firm that aims to combat what Zach sees as a fundamental inefficiency across biotech early stage investments. The earliest stages of company building is challenging for anyone and everyone. A few years ago, Zach noticed that it is particularly difficult for companies in the therapeutic space because drug discovery, as many of us know, is a extremely long and costly process. In software, you can learn new things, pivot, much harder in early stage biotech. Critical mistakes can kill an early stage company before it even gets off the ground. So Curie.Bio is doing something, I think, remarkable, and it's aiming to be both a seed investor and a drug discovery partner to early stage founders. It provides access to top tier drug development experts. You can go check out their site, but I think their team has developed and brought to market something like 50 or 60, 70 drugs. And obviously they also provide early stage funding. Very unique model. Extremely excited to dig in, excited for you to meet him.
Well, I will always say this. Any friend of yours should be a friend of mine because you've always introduced me. I'll say it in a positive way. You've always introduced me to the most interesting people. Whenever you've said you need to meet this person, I'm always blown away. So I'm super excited, not just for all the reasons you outlined, and anyone who also wants to optimize the economy for entrepreneurs and consumers is awesome. He has this concept that he's talked about it being the YC for biotech, which I find intellectually fascinating and want to dig in on that with him. Because of all, we can have a whole other separate podcast about the differences in the venture ecosystem because of YC. And if he can do that for biotech, holy cow, Batman. And separately, we at Sapphire have been digging into biotech itself, and then also looking at a lot of our funds taking the tech side of meeting bio on the other side and really trying to understand it. So thank you for reading my mind and having your extraordinary powers of ESP, because he sits at the intersection, which is amazing. And again, the 100th reason why it's so much fun to do these with you. So I'm really excited to do it.
Let's do it. Let's get Zach on. Hey, Zach, thank you for doing this with us.
Yeah. I'm on a podcast tour apparently, so here I am.
I want to very quickly start. We both went to what I think was a very special school called Hunter High School in New York City many years ago. We're very old now.
Oh, wait, I'm older than both of you, so pause on the old shit. I got that one covered.
We're ancient, Beezer.
Okay, I'm like with the dinosaurs, apparently. But yes, you guys had an awesome high school. I wish I was there.
What do you think about Hunter looking back now?
Definitely one of the better things that happened to me growing up. For quick context, it's a magnet school, so it's kind of like test in, but it's free. So you would get a lot of people who were extremely smart and worked hard, but didn't have a ton of money. So it's like pretty heavy kids of immigrants, typically, although not all of it. So you're just surrounded by people who are like hustling. And even in high school, they're hustling. And then I don't know if you found this, but I found when I got to Penn that it was easier. Like Hunter was harder.
I think probably the most competitive environment I've ever been exposed to. Would you say more competitive than startups?
In some way, yeah. It's definitely up there. Where you just feel like the people around you are smarter than you. That's the biggest thing.
And maybe work harder.
Well, for me, when I learned going out of Hunter, I'm like, oh shit, there's no chance in hell I'm ever going to be the smartest person in the room. But like, I got this other skill, and that I can communicate reasonably well. And most of the nerds that went to Hunter, us included, were like great communicators. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to lean into this skill because it's like one thing that I can do that, I'm not going to like out math these people. That's for sure.
So you go to Wharton, it's easy in comparison.
Which I'm sure everyone at Wharton now is cringing to hear this, but I love that.
Well, Donald Trump went to Wharton theoretically, so it can't be that hard of a school. Like, how complicated could this be?
Was the Hunter experience related? Because did you drop out?
I dropped out of undergrad in my last year at Wharton, yeah.
Much less popular thing to do at the time. Now I think it's sort of become part of the culture or some badge in some way. Had you raised capital already in school? So there were folks that were like happy to fund you even while you continued school.
Josh complimented first round capital.
Yeah.
The king of doing that, right, is Josh at first round. And he also went to Wharton. So thanks to him, we had some funding and a little bit of credibility, and off to the races.
Lessons learned from that entrepreneurial experience that you brought with you to Flatiron, and maybe things you did differently or similar from a founder perspective.
I think every founder learns the same lesson from the first to the second company, if they do a second one, which is just like the quality of the people around you probably is the single most important thing. Once you have like early product market fit, that you have to do yourself. That I believe is a founder-led process, obviously. But if you catch that, how do you go from something with a few customers to an actual real business? I didn't fully appreciate at Invite how important the team building was, because I'd never done it before, and recruiting is really hard when you're like 19 years old. And then that's part of why we sold it, right? Like we had this offer from Google, and the business was picking up steam. Like, had I been a second time founder at that point in time, I would not have sold it. But we didn't know how to like actually run a business operationally. And so we ended up selling it to Google for like $80 million at the time.
It's a lot of money for a 19-year-old.
I think it's still a lot of money for a lot of people. I'm just going to
any year-old, yeah.
Having like a few $1 million in the bank when you're 21 or whatever is pretty nice. But our main competitor, which started after us and was behind us at the time, was a company called The Trade Desk, which is now like a $30 billion public company. And we were ahead. We were ahead of them. And there you go, right? Like, Jeff Green, who started Trade Desk, knew what he was doing. We didn't. So we sold it, took some chips off the table. And then I got to Google for 2 years. And it really clicked for me, like how important having incredibly smart people was for everything you did. And so we took that lesson into Flatiron, which is, we were like a recruiting focused machine as best as we could. And I don't just mean like thinking about hiring great people, but like really in the weeds, how you design your job specs, how you do interviews, how you do interview training, how you do interview calibration, how you make an interview decision or a hiring decision. We spent a lot of time driving that process. And then when I got after Flatiron now with Curie, it was even more of a thing. I mean, like the recruiting is kind of like the only thing I thought at that point that had mattered. So I think every founder eventually learns that lesson about, having great people around you. It sometimes just takes a little bit of time to figure out how to do that and how to do that well.
Can I take the comment about Curie and lean into that and just sort of then do the arc of, obviously Flatiron's in the healthcare space, but then you went all in on biotech. And what was I'm not sure pivot's the right word, but what was the reason why? And then could you explain a little bit about the Curie model? Because it's fascinating and I don't want to butcher it by misparaphrasing.
Yeah. So it's obviously a weird career, right? Because I went from like pure B2B SaaS to like some hybrid B2B SaaS plus healthcare, which was Flatiron, but was in drug development / broadly therapeutics, but not in discovery, not in the science. And then now doing like pure science and almost no software, actually. I mean, we have internal tooling and stuff like that, but like we don't build a software product and sell it, if that makes sense. We are a biotech fund with an interesting model, which I'll touch on. But yeah, what drew me to it was spending time in therapeutics and in, new drug development, new drug discovery, and really clicked for me that like the biggest impact that you can have in the industry, in the therapeutics industry, was in better drugs. There's a lot of stuff you can do to optimize the processes downstream and how you think about trial design and how you think about commercializing these drugs and providing evidence to insurance companies to cover them and all the kind of stuff that Flatiron was doing. But the reality was, like, if you just built better drug in the first place, many of those downstream problems were not as important. And so this idea of like local maximum versus global maximum, if to use the computer science phrase, where I felt like the global maximum was in new drug discovery. And so I wanted to spend time there. I wanted to work in that area. I didn't know exactly how somebody without a science background could make an impact, but that's what drew me to the category kind of primarily. And then related, I just didn't want to do another software company. In all honesty, I've done it twice. I'm good at it. There's some things I don't like about it. And so I just didn't want to spend my time building like yet another software business, especially because software these days is so competitive, where I almost feel like many of these companies, if you don't start them, somebody else will. And I didn't want to do something where the market would like inevitably create it anyway. I wanted to try and do something where if I don't do it, it doesn't happen. That's what drew me into biotech, without a specific idea, to be very clear. It was just, this is an interesting category. How can I help? And one of my co-founders and I spent about a year between leaving Roche and then starting this, just doing research, trying to figure out how this whole industry worked, down to like the day-to-day work that the scientists were doing. And so getting that understanding and then coming back with an idea of like, okay, I think there's a play here that, we could be uniquely capable of building. But that, it wasn't like an epiphany moment of like, I want to start this thing.
What did you learn as you did the research tour? Or like, what were the key pieces that led to Curie? And I imagine some of those pieces were also like from a financing and investor perspective, in addition to drug development processes. So yeah, curious what the key learnings were.
There are so many things about drug discovery that are basically the opposite of software. When we started to realize kind of like, okay, here's why this industry works that way. And I'll give you real specifics in a second. That's what got me to just get really interested. It was like, oh, this thing doesn't work in any way like I'm used to. There's got to be a reason why. And I think one of the biggest things that, let's talk about like some of the differences. There's probably one big one, which is in software, you can make a lot of mistakes in the product, including like bugs in the code and features that don't work or building the wrong thing. Or in many cases in startups, building for the wrong customer and figuring it out later. There's the whole like mantra of move fast and break things. And the reason you can do that in software is because the mistakes are small and they don't take up a ton of your time and money because they're software mistakes. They're bits, right? It's just like in the computer. And so you could launch something to a customer on a Monday, get some feedback on a Tuesday, and make a change on a Wednesday. And you could do all of that while measuring whether it's working. And so you don't have to get the plan right in the beginning. It's not required. In fact, it's sometimes wrong to even try to think too much because you just, you're guessing.
Right.
Yeah. Like the common advice you get in software is like, I don't know, just go talk to the customers. And that shit does not work in biotech at all. It is the opposite, because in drug discovery, the vast majority of your, what I think of as like make, test, iterate cycle, right? Like every industry has that. You make something, you test it. Now, test in software is usually talk to customer and then iterate based on the feedback that you get. That cycle in a therapeutics company is months or years and hundreds of thousands, and in many cases, millions of dollars. Like you can do a whole bunch of work and not even know you made a mistake in the design of that work. Think in like, you designed an experiment incorrectly, but then you went and ran it for months. And if you get data back on the other side of it and you look at it and you go, oh, this doesn't make any sense. And then you realize that the thing you designed in the first place was wrong. You are now out all that money, all that time, all the overhead associated with it. So it's a very long-winded way of saying the margin for error is materially lower in therapeutics.
This might be too detailed a question, but does it start with the molecule level or before that? Like if you pick the wrong molecule or the wrong compound, doesn't matter what experiment you run. Like where's the initial point of don't fuck it up?
Way before that.
Way before that. Okay.
And it's not in one area. There are multiple decisions you have to make that if you get them wrong, you are in real trouble. A simple example being, what is the actual target? Typically, what's the protein in the body that you are trying to stop or increase, or there's a thing causing the disease that you think is causing the disease. And, you're building a drug for that target. The terminology would be a target. Well, did you get that right? Because like you could do all the downstream work and build an amazing drug for a target that doesn't work. And that company is still worth $0. Right. Like, and so that's just the starting point, right? Like, are we going after the right target? Are we thinking about in this case, it's the biology, which is like, how is the disease showing up in the body and what is driving it? And if you get that wrong, you're dead. Then there's the like, how might we build a drug for this target? What are the different modalities? Are we using small molecules? Are we using antibodies? Are we using bispecific antibodies? Are we using antibody drug conjugates? There's all these different tools at your disposal, and they all have pros and cons about how they work and how safe they are. And it depends on the target, and it depends on the disease, and it depends on the potential side effects. Like there's no clear answer typically. And then you actually have to go discover, and I think of it more as drug engineering. You have to go make one of those things, and you've got to take that through a giant set of stage gates to make a drug that doesn't just hit the target, like bind, if you will, to the protein of interest, but also doesn't do a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Because it's not just, can you stop the tumor from growing, as just to use a simple example here, but can you do that without killing the person before you stop the tumor, right? It's got all these weird side effects. You've got to deal with things like the pharmacokinetics, right? Which is like, how is the drug absorbed in the body, and how is it distributed, and how is it metabolized, and how does the body eliminate it, right? So you could make an amazing drug, but if you stick it in the body and the body metabolizes it out of your system in 7 minutes, that's not a good drug. And then you got to stepwise through different models, meaning not like non-human models, because you want to know as much as you can about how this drug likely works in humans before you do it. So you put it in a petri dish, and then you put it in a mouse, you put it in a different kind of mouse, and then you put it in a dog, and you put it in a monkey. And like, this is drug discovery in a nutshell. This is a simplified version, but think like 30-step process. And at every single one of those steps, if you got it wrong the step before, you're in real trouble. Like I had this epiphany moment at one point after I learned about this, where I said to we have 2 scientific co-founders and then 2 of us that are not scientific. I'm like, I don't understand how we've ever successfully made a drug.
True.
I'm like, this is insane. And the level of work in planning, the analogy I've used for people is in architecture, like building a building, right? Which is like, if your architectural plans have like the toilets in the wrong place, and then you made a mistake, and you're like, oh, let me just go fix the plumbing. And you're like, oh shit, on the 5th floor, the line is here, and on the 6th floor is over. I gotta like rip this whole building down to fix a problem. And so the architectural plans have to be perfect and detailed. And then you still have to like oversee the general contractor. That's it, right? Whereas in software, you're kind of like, I'll figure it out.
You build the building as you go.
Yeah. And like, the building isn't even, you don't have any materials. The building, it's like a picture of a building. And you can just like change the picture.
You build the airplane while you're in midair falling out of the sky. It's great.
Yeah, except that it's software, so the airplane can't even really fall out of the sky. Like there's no real downside, which is why people make so much money in software and so few people make money in biotech.
Let me ask you one quick question. There are biotech venture firms. They find some really smart scientist, and they're like, "This person has a good idea, and we know the other stuff." Or maybe they say they know the other stuff.
Or we know people that know the other stuff, which is more typical.
My understanding is they take that person becomes sort of the chief scientific officer. They own most of the company, the venture firm maybe. Is that like the kind of setup from a investment perspective?
Part of why this is so challenging is you have to have the best people in the world at the beginning. Whereas like, if you think about a classic software company, some of the advice you give to the founders, as I used to give, is like, okay, the quality of the people you can get at the seed is kind of like meh. And then at the A, you can get slightly better people. And then at the B, you can get slightly better people. And you constantly are like turning your team over. That kind of doesn't work here because you need the smartest, most senior people at the beginning because they're laying out the plan. And if the plan is wrong, the execution doesn't matter. Now you have to do both. Without the plan, the execution doesn't work. Or even if it does work, it doesn't matter, is better way saying it. So you've got this really, really challenging problem, which is that at the point in time in which the company is the riskiest and it has the least amount of data to show that you actually have a potential drug, which is the beginning, it also is the point in time in which you need a lot of money. Because you have to recruit these like very senior experienced people, and they make a lot of money, right? Because their alternative job is in pharma or some late stage biotech company, and they're not making like $200,000.
Or they've in theory, built successful biotech companies already, and maybe can't be hired or something.
Or they're just not interested in taking the risk because, their opportunity cost of their time, not even just from a money perspective, but from you only have so many years in your career where you can work on new drugs. And they just want to work on this other thing. And, nobody wants to like triple down on something that early. So you've got this people problem. And by the way, it's not one person, right? Because you need, it could be a CSO, then maybe you need a head of biology, maybe you need a head of chemistry, maybe you need a vendor work. Like it's a team, and that team can be millions of dollars in just salary. And that's before you start spending money on the actual science, which is another challenging area of like, where do the physical experiments happen, costs associated with that. And so what the classic biotech model has been is like seed rounds are really big. Right? Seed rounds in biotech have been 20, 30, 40, $50 million because you've got to recruit the team in. And part of the reason the team joins is because you stick a bunch of money in it. Now, that is really challenging both for founder and investor because obviously it's like highly dilutive to the founder because the valuations on these companies are extraordinarily low in the beginning, as they should be, by the way. Like they should be low. The amount of risk is insane. Like a new biotech, NPV is negative for sure. Just like on average is probably negative. You got to bring all that team in. And then as a venture fund, part of the challenge of that model is you have highly concentrated bets at really high risk moments in time. So it's not like in software, you're like tripling down on some company at the B or the C. Like that company's probably not going to go bankrupt once you have like customers and data. But in biotech, you can still go bankrupt until pretty late in the game because once you put that thing into humans and it doesn't work, it's kind of worth nothing.
I would say you can even go bankrupt post-IPO.
Absolutely.
Right, given the arc of how biotech companies IPO earlier to get money to fund.
True also for a lot of software companies in the last
less
few
likely.
years, but yeah.
You're still doing your testing sort of in public eyes, right?
Absolutely.
And we've seen a lot of those recently.
It's been tough sledding out there.
This caught my eye, which is essentially like interesting. Because remember, if you go back to like what I spent a lot of my time on at Flatiron, recruiting. And I kind of view like maybe besides fundraising, like the number one thing I'm good at is recruiting. And in my head, I'm going, this is actually a fascinating market because the other nuance of biotech is the people that you need at the point in time in which you need them in the beginning, you don't actually necessarily need them full time. And I know this is like crazy idea, but because the make, test, iterate cycle in biotech could be weeks or months or quarters, there is a little bit of like stop-start dynamics where you kick off an experiment and you just kind of have to wait to see what data comes back. And especially if you're the architect, not the doer, but the architect of the plan, there's a stop-start dynamic, which means for a decent percentage of your time, if you're just working on one thing, you're waiting.
Right.
So what a perfect opportunity to think about building not just a venture fund, but building a giant shared services organization, meaning like we hire some of the best scientific talent in the world centrally, and then kind of fractionally staff them out. And there's a lot of nuance to how to do that to these early ideas. Couldn't you build a materially better seed fund because you're not just providing the capital, which we do. We also write the checks, and we write big checks, like $10 million. Relative to biotech, they're small, but in software land, they're big. And then provide all of the shared services. And the beauty of that as a founder and idea generator is it's not just like random people you get. It's some of the best humans in the world in drug discovery because we can recruit them centrally because we give them the like upside and stability of being in a giant, well-funded venture machine, but with the ability to spend their time on multiple things. It's actually a really cool job if you're a sharp scientist because the impact that you can have is in multiple programs at the same time. Now, this isn't necessarily the most novel idea in the world. People have thought about this before in a weird way. This is like pharma's business model.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like in theory, a lot of those people could work at pharma, but they're not doing the early stage part.
They do a little bit of it, but like the incentives are kind of funky. You don't get a cut if you win. It's not
right.
It's fake capitalism. Real capitalism is skin in the game. And, but it's been a challenge for people to build this model before because it requires raising a lot of money. Because you're not talking about building a 4-person team. You're talking about building a 100-person team.
Can I ask specifics? Like, can you say Curie, like how many people are you in person? Is this like YC where you go, maybe not in Dogpatch, but you go somewhere and there's all the peoples, or is it remote and more of a biotech everywhere?
We're remote first for 2 reasons. One, because great people don't all live in one place and they're scarce. And 2, the founders are all over. So it's not a class in the way that YC does it. We also are right. We're doing the full seed check, right? So this isn't like pre-seed. We are funding your full seed round. So we have people in San Francisco, in Boston is the main area, New York, Europe, New Jersey, San Diego. So we have 87 people today. I don't think you can name a single seed fund that has 87 people. We do. And we will be 120 or so probably at peak over the next 18 months. And some of those people focus on the diligence and the picking. Some focus on the execution. Some focus on other shared services. We have like a 9-person recruiting team, if that makes sense. We help you with contracting and vendor management. We help you with project management. There's a lot of stuff we do underneath the hood that you just don't have to worry about as the founder. And I think more importantly is you just get access to some of the best people immediately, right? Which is a really hard thing to do. And in order to pull this off, we had to raise a bunch of money, not just for the venture fund, meaning like money we put into the startups themselves, but we had to raise extra money for the team. Yep. And that was kind of like the little twist on this model that people hadn't done before, which is we built 2 companies in one, and we funded 2 companies in one. We funded a shared services organization with one set of money, about $250 million. And then we built a venture fund that attaches to it, which is now about $1 billion in capital raised. So the idea to me was so obvious. The execution was really hard to pull it off because you're doing all this fundraising before you have anything. Like we have nothing to show in a PowerPoint. A good PowerPoint, really good PowerPoint. But that was kind of
great.
That was kind of it. And so the whole goal of the thing is net new drugs, right? And to do it in a capital efficient way, right? Now we can take an idea and drive it to the milestone that matters, typically animal data, for, a third or a half, or in some cases even less of the cost that you would typically have to spend if you wanted to like build a giant team and build a lab and do all the normal, like really expensive stuff. Fractionalization is kind of a wonderful thing if you can pull it off. And that's what we do.
Do you need a founder? Like how much of it is a founder coming to you saying, hey, I've spent doing my PhD and I've spent all this time and I need help bringing to market, versus like you have 80 of the most amazing people in biotech on your team, and like presumably you can just do some of the drug development yourself?
You need a spark of creativity.
Okay.
You need a good idea. And my view on that is the chances of that spark coming internal is materially lower than the spark coming external, because like, okay, we have 80 people, but there's like a few 100,000 people in this industry. And so it's better to source ideas externally versus internally. Now, it's really noisy. Most of the external ideas are bad. And so you have to be really, really good at like sifting through a lot of volume, but having a giant team helps you do that. We get 200 or so external ideas a month. It's a lot. So, we're trending to like 2,500 new pitches a year at this point, and maybe more. Do you need the founder operationally? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And it depends on the idea. Is the founder like a true expert in the biology or a true expert in the technology, or then yes. Is the founder just a really clever idea generator and actually like we can do the rest in partnership with them? That also works. So it just depends on the specifics of the idea. And we want to be flexible to kind of like meet the founder where they are. By the way, some founders prefer to not be operational.
Of the drugs that you're launching, how far along are they in the last couple of years? Given your model, can I ask if it's faster than folks not using your model?
It should be way faster.
It should be.
Well, like, even a simple thing of time it takes from idea to team, right? Let's leave the actual wet lab stuff out for a second, but even just in like the team building, the recruiting, the plan design, starting with the people up front, that can cut like 12 to 18 months right there. And if you're really good at the people stuff, you can probably shave even more time. I would say when we start on something, like sometimes there's no data. It's just a really clever idea. Sometimes there's some data on a technology platform, but we are most of the time, 95% of the time, we are starting the actual drug discovery part of it from scratch. So you're mostly not starting with a molecule, although every once in a while somebody shows up with not a drug, like nothing you can put into people for sure, but something that works kind of in a petri dish. And so it's a good starting point, but you have to spend major time and effort building that thing into like an actual drug that is capable of going into human trials. And that is not a trivial set of work right there. So, it's about as early as it gets. Maybe the better way of thinking about it is at the end of the seed, what do you have? And in most cases, what we're aiming for is really compelling animal data that gives you, typically dog or monkey, depending on the area. Sometimes it's a mouse. That gives you risk reduction and therefore a reason to believe that this is worth funding into human trials. Because funding into a human trial is at least $30 million. And in many cases, way more than that. So there is no like lean trial in the way you would typically think about lean. I mean, even people, if I say 30, people are like, that's too low.
When you're looking at being the seed funder and the return that you want to make very specifically, and that also means attracting that Series A, B funder.
Yes.
How are you thinking about that part of the food chain? Because maybe as a seed backer, you can then control the final drug price, but I suspect the answer is no. How are you playing the game today, especially because the rules are getting rewritten all the time?
So they haven't been rewritten that often, I have to say.
Oh, all the time today in the last 100 years.
Yeah. Well, that creates uncertainty, and the uncertainty creates pause. So like, it would not shock me if 2025 has the fewest number of new discovery funded companies in recent history, would be my guess. Like, because if you can't predict payment and reimbursement, then you can't predict the funding that happens before that, which means you can't take the risk before that. It all trickles down. They're all connected. There's no like, if this doesn't work, this will still happen. Like, no. How we look at it is not rocket science, but I think it's important for people to understand. We look at the size of the patient population, right? Like, how many people are we talking about if this works? We obviously look at, do we think, we can be successful both in efficacy and safety? So you look at like, how good of a drug do we think we can make? And then we look at the reimbursement landscape. We also look at like, what can you charge for this? What percentage of the population do you think you can actually get into, your market and get prescribed? What's the cost of, the physician education and all of these things? And I will tell you very clearly, if those numbers check out poorly, we don't do it. We just don't do it. Even if the drug idea is good, because you cannot do it profitably. It does not work, because you're just going to get killed at every single round, and the later investors are going to wipe you out, and the later investors behind them are going to wipe you out. So there's no point in doing it. And yeah, we absolutely do that math on every single company.
How do you do the math for like other indications at the very early stages that you might not predict? Like, I'm thinking of GLP-1s, right? And like GLP-1s, I don't know if they understood this.
They didn't. No. Like,
started out as diabetes, and they're like, okay, diabetes population. And now like, maybe it's everyone.
Look, every once in a while you get lucky. And the science that you underwrote the thing to was, we think it'll work in this area because we understand the biology. And then it works better than you thought. And all of a sudden it's like 10x bigger. There's no way anybody knew.
You're not going to like underwrite that.
No, I mean, unless you can logically reason why, if the drug works here, it should work here.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we will do that. A little example, we're working on a company, we've about 30 now, but like that focuses on HPV positive cancers. So these are tumors that are driven by HPV. The biology is pretty clear. It happens in cervical cancer, and then in head and neck cancer in particular is the interesting one. And there's some existing head and neck cancer therapies. They're not particularly great. The lifespan of these patients is not good. We go and we model out, okay, when you launch it, you're not going to be the first treatment they pick. You're going to be second or third. Okay, well, how much is that market worth? Now, now you got to run 2 more trials to move up the line. So there's another $500 million of expense. Like, what's that worth? Can you get it to the front? Because, if you're the first treatment, the population is bigger. And we do all the math. We actually have a team of people, and we're a seed fund. We are the first to check in. And so there's this really difficult conundrum for Americans, which is basically, are you willing to pay high prices today? Like, they're not cheap, but because of that, you get great drugs in the future for you and your kids when you're sick. And also remember that these drugs go generic. Doctors do not go generic. Surgeons do not go generic, right? Office visits do not go generic. Like, the rest of the healthcare system does not go generic. In fact, it goes the other direction. All right. It gets more expensive because we don't have enough doctors into this country and they charge a lot. But the drugs do. So it's basically, are we willing to pay more now to have them? And we'll save a whole bunch of lives later for you and your children and your family. But this idea that we can have cheap drugs today and good drugs in the future is not true. It is not possible because they just won't get started. And it's not binary. Obviously, there's a spectrum. It depends. But the more you chip at reimbursement, the fewer shots on goal early stage biotech funds will take. And I can tell you, because this is all we do.
Why can't a politician explain that?
It's hard because people feel it. They feel it every day. They feel it when they go to the pharmacy and they got to like shell out $300 for something. And it's really hard in that moment to be like, but remember in the future, you're going to have even better drugs. And we don't make those trades as human beings. Yeah. I wish we talked about it in this way. It's a little, and by the way, obviously I feel strongly that this is a great trade for humanity. But I could see how for some people it's not. And, they're like, no, I want the cheap thing now. And so like, you're not going to get the same answer from everybody. But I think it's important to educate people that the reward at the end drives the innovation in the first place. And if you don't have that reward, you don't get the innovation. It just doesn't happen. Now, there's this other nuance, which the Trump administration is talking about, which is that the United States pays higher prices than everybody else. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we basically subsidize good drugs to the rest of the world. And that is true. It's just a true statement. We pay materially more for the drugs that we have on market. Now, we get them faster. Humans we have more access. There's a bunch of stuff you can get here that you cannot get in Europe, for example, and you definitely can't get in other countries. We do that because we're rich as a country relative to others. But it's not exactly fair. Like relative to our GDP, we're still paying a little more than, definitely the Europeans and others. And part of that is the European countries have been willing to basically band together and just deny. Like, we're not going to pay for this at all. So the country doesn't get the drug. And they pay lower prices, all this stuff. And so we do subsidize the rest of the world. And I think there's an interesting question of like, first, do you care? Second, like, if you do care, is your plan to pay less? Because you're going to have that first problem we talked about, which is like, fast forward 10 years, not going to look pretty. Or is there a way to try and pull the Europeans in particular, it's basically like wealthy enough countries up and force them to pay more in some mechanism. And there's an interesting, kind of like same problem, two very different solutions. One is good, one is bad, I think. These are part of the problems I think people deal with. This is another reason not to go on this long diatribe, but part of why I care so much about the health of the U.S. economy is that a high, fast-growing U.S. economy can afford to pay for this stuff. And if the U.S. can afford to pay for it, we will get more stuff and we will get great things in the future because the science is awesome. But if the U.S. economy is struggling today, we will not get as many great things in the future because the pie for us to spend on, Medicare will shrink. So a fast-growing U.S. economy is good for not just like, tech, but it's really good for biotech. And it's really good for you as like an individual patient, right? Like that's ultimately the thing I think, encouraging people to think about, which is like, what about in 10 years when you need something? Yeah. That has to have started already. Like if you want it in 10 years, we have to have started that last year, 2 years ago.
I'm scared to open this Pandora's box, but I was going to ask about AI. Are you asking about AI?
I want to ask about China.
Oh, all right. So Zach, here's your challenge. AI and China in 5 minutes. Pick one.
My China question is also, in theory, really strong scientific talent. Yes. Maybe play a little faster and looser around bringing drugs to market. Like I think that guy keeps testing, I think CRISPR in humans and like keeps going to jail. And then like he's out of jail and he like keeps doing it in China. I don't know what's wrong with that scientist. How do you think about the race there? Because maybe you make the case that China catches up very quickly.
There's a lot of stuff to talk about in China and biotech, but maybe I'll pick two really important ones as it relates to like normal people that you should care about. I'll start with the negative. The Chinese biotech ecosystem has some very great people in it and some very honest people in it, but the IP theft is real and it is pervasive. Meaning, if you share something with a Chinese company, could be one of their biotechs, could be one of their vendors, could be an investor there. And I'm not saying it's 100% of the time, the chances of the information that you shared being shared with somebody else is near 100%. There's no legal ramifications because you cannot go and sue them in China. You have no standing whatsoever. And this isn't like sometimes they do it. This is like the strategy. Like this is part of the strategy. And we've seen crazy stuff like, you send some molecule to get synthesized at one company over here, and then it shows up in some other company over here that are like competitors, but like they're all kind of adjacent and related, and they're all basically like government backed. And so that is a problem because it puts American companies at risk because we do obey IP laws here mostly. And if we don't, you go to court. Everybody knows this, like in the industry. And so sophisticated US investors and biotechs kind of like work around it, right? You don't share everything. You only share subsets of it. You kind of plan for it. But I do want to start with like, they do steal stuff.
And most of the big contract manufacturers are there. So like a lot of people are like sending.
But you don't send all of it. You send pieces. Also remember, like once a drug is approved, like we build manufacturing many places besides China, Europe, Canada, India now, even in the US. The actual manufacturing of the drug to me is like not a China problem. The China problem is like they're really good at some of the work before the drug is approved, the preclinical work, the actual like the engineering of the drug versus the manufacturing of the drug. Mm-hmm. One is like discovery processes. One is just like scale. The scale one you don't have to worry about, but there's still stuff on this part, and you just have to like really pay attention. I don't know exactly how you handle that as the U.S. government, but it is a concern. The other thing they do, and this comes down to a little bit of like ethics, is they allow the biotechs, like the local Chinese biotechs, and the physicians and patients to take more safety risk than we allow in the United States. And to be really specific about what I mean by that is there's a level of safety testing that is required in the United States, think mouse, dog, monkey, a lot of like dog and monkey studies. And the reason we do those studies is to find issues that may show up in human beings before you put it in the human being so that you can make these drugs safer before you go into first in human testing. And if you skip that step, maybe something bad happens, maybe it doesn't. But as a US industry, we've been unwilling to allow people to take that risk. Right now, remember, on the other side of this is a patient and a physician who has raised their hand and said, I want to be in this trial. And I signed an informed consent. And it's not like there was serious informed consent. Sometimes there's videos and there's education and the doc has to follow all the protocols. So like, we're basically saying as the FDA and a society, we think the risk is too high, and it's so high, we're not going to even let you take the risk, which just cannot happen until we have these steps. You can agree with that. You can disagree with that, but that's kind of how it works. Now, why is that a problem? Because those steps in the process are like 12 to 24 months and $10 million. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about drug discovery as a business, you've just, as an American company, you are like disadvantaged because there's this step that is required for you that takes a lot longer and is really expensive. Whether you agree with that step being required or not is a little bit more about your view of like society risk versus individual risk. And everybody's got a little different opinion on that. It's usually like, I think it's society until it's me. That's usually what I find. They're like, I don't think anyone should be able to, but when it's me, I want to be able to do it. So a little bit of that. But the Chinese system has allowed many of their companies to kind of skip that final step and go faster. And that harms US biotech industry. Mm-hmm. Because you can create kind of like a fast follow copycat type of company in China and catch up a lot faster. And that dynamic is bad for US biotechs because the investors in the US biotechs know that this is happening. And so their willingness to take risk on your company comes down because of this like unknown of like, is there going to be a Chinese copycat that they rush to market that like some, Merck goes and buys? Because that's actually really what happens is they like rush it into humans. if it works, this is a subset, big pharma comes in, picks it up, as they should. That's their business, is to find good drugs for patients, right?
You've talked about AI and the consumer behavior. Curious in a synthesized way how you're seeing this play out in biotech. And bit of context, we have a number of our funds who are looking at bringing AI and tech from the tooling standpoint, right, into biotech. And then I'd be curious how you're seeing it happen. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming you're seeing it from the engineering standpoint, or maybe not. Maybe it's just at the consumer level, and we'll get smarter about how we think about the world.
The short answer is, if you think about biotech as like, a 30-step process, and in each one of those steps, there is a physical experiment that you have to run in a lab, and you have to look at the results, and then you have to interpret those results to figure out what you want to do next. And if you think about AI, what is it really doing? It's a prediction machine. And one of the benefits of AI in like a full digital world, coding, image generation, predicting what you want to type next, is that feedback loop is immediate and really high quality and scaled, right? Like, do you know how many chat GPT images were probably generated in the last 3 weeks? I don't know, like 4 billion would be my guess. And so you just get these like incredible tight feedback loops. In biotech, you don't have those, right? So even if, the computer makes a prediction, you got to go make it. And then you got to loop back. And so there's a real challenge in just like the impact here is extremely difficult in a physical world, because there's that cycle is really, really, really hard. The other thing is the training data for these models. The training data for LLMs in the digital world is every written word of every person in the history of humanity of all time. And now we're making new training data sets. It's insane. And the training data set in biotech tends to be like stuff generated in a lab on a petri dish, which is a piece of plastic. And it's not a body. It's not a human body.
And by the way, all those data sets are highly protected inside of pharma and organizations that are, it's not Reddit.
Correct. I think there's pieces of that 30-step process that AI will be wonderful for, and will cut costs and will make scientists more productive. Obviously, the AlphaFold stuff is probably the biggest, right? So, predicting the shape of proteins, that is super valuable. There's some limitations to it, but it's way better than the tools we had before, and you use it in combination with other stuff. So I would say like, great, net positive, glad to have it. We use the tools where they're relevant. I think this idea of like the computer is going to tell you the drug is just fantasy and not real. And even in the one rare case where maybe that happens, it's never going to be exactly like that. The repeatability of that is probably impossible. And a lot of this has to just do with like the training data and the fact that biology is hard. And I just got, I don't want my soapbox for one last second. Why? Because we barely know how a cell works in the first place. For me, it's interesting because like, I kind of came from the outside. I read the New York Times headlines. The amount that we don't know about how the human body works relative to what we do know is like 1 billion times larger what we don't know than what we do. And it always feels cool like we're making all this progress, because we are making lots of progress, but like we're starting at the bottom here, right? Like, we didn't have physicians like washing their hands before surgery until 80 years ago. It's like, this is pretty new. Until 20 years ago, we thought that like, that's it, DNA. We can sequence DNA. That's going to tell us everything about how the body works. Not true. Simply not true. So it's a way more complicated system than I think anybody ever realized. And if you don't understand it, it's hard to build models on top of it, right? Because like the training data just like doesn't really exist at the scale that you need, and at the accuracy that you need, and the repeatability that you need. So most of the AI companies in biotech, I think they're cool and interesting, but a lot of them are like generating their own training data, like, which means like machines and lab space and people and pipettes and sequencers, and like it's really expensive, and you're still generating this much training data kind of like relative to what, like just Google has training on YouTube. I think AI's impact in healthcare will be materially bigger in healthcare services, meaning like when you go to your doctor.
And all the administration around that.
Yes, a little bit of an arms race between, insurance and doctor, but yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. So good, but by no means a panacea. I'm glad to have it, but we got a lot more to go.
You're going to be able to keep your job for a few more years.
300 years. Like, we are nowhere close. We are nowhere close.
I know what to do for my son when he says, what should I study in college?
Biology. Like, I think the United States should do like the Manhattan Project for biology, which is like, oh shit, if we want to treat and cure disease in the future, we need to understand what causes it in the first place. And we barely understand this. And that all starts in biology. And unfortunately, there isn't a great business model for biology because like you discover, you publish and everybody has a copy of it. So like, it's not a great business, but it is really good for society. And then there are downstream implications that are positive for drug discovery. We need like a Manhattan Project for biologists because you need a lot of training, years, decade, and so we need to make it more financially secure to be a biologist. We don't do that at all. In fact, all we're doing right now is scaring all the smart international biologists away, which is so fucking stupid.
Well, you'll hire all of them at Curie.
We don't have $1 trillion budget or whatever.
You might. You're almost there.
I would say if you have an advanced degree on the path to being a PhD and you are willing to come to the United States and do a PhD in biology, you get a green card immediately. Fuck it. You get a passport.
Golden passport.
They're way more valuable than another like rich idiot like me. Like, yeah. Like, why are we not doing this stuff? Why are we not investing? People think it's tools and technologies and like, okay, where do those come from? People do all this stuff. It's not like the tool just like magically appears. It's like humans grinding on shit all day. And like, if you don't have the human in the first place, you don't get it. It just doesn't happen. It's like, we've had so much technical progress in the last 30 years that people view it as inevitable. It is not inevitable. People don't remember the Dark Ages? We went from like Roman society with roads and governance and food and distribution and trade where the Romans fucking killed. It was awesome, right? For a while. And then it collapsed. And then we went through hundreds of years of regressed progress. Like society got worse, not better. And it wasn't like a blip, it was like a minor recession. It was like, they called it the Dark Ages for a reason. So like, until we got kind of back in like the 1400s or 13, whatever, it was 500 years. So like, I just think this idea that like human progress is fundamentally inevitable at the pace that we've been pushing it is not true. There are systems and incentives and infrastructure that we have in place that cause this to happen. And if we go back on those things, we are going to not get the progress that we want. And progress are things like new drugs, new procedures, new diagnostics, things that keep you alive longer and healthier. Those things take an incredible long time to build.
Zach, thank you. You're the man, and appreciate you doing this with us and appreciate what you're doing in bio and at Curie.
Saving the world. Appreciate that. Thank you.
I don't know about that, but hopefully net positive. So
thank you for listening to Origins, the show where we discuss the venture ecosystem through the lens of myself, a GP, and Beezer, an LP.
Be sure to tune in next time for a bonus minisode where Nick and I unpack today's conversation with Zach.
You can find that right here in this feed. And while you're there, please rate and review the podcast. It's extremely helpful for other folks looking for venture insights to be able to find our show. I'm Nick Chirls.
And I'm Beezer Clarkson. We'll be back soon. Thank you for listening.